Now, I was thinking though about right to what you said, Michael, how important it is. And I think even in the concept of the Sabbath, we can get stuck in a place where we're holding ourselves to a standard that I think God was just trying to establish a place of rest, but of focused rest, what the rest is for. How many of you work sun up to sundown 6 days a week? None of us, I think, hold that necessarily we're required to work then. I know my work doesn't end when the sun goes down. Um, mine could happen at all hours of the night. So I'm not on an agrarian schedule. But I think what the challenge was is, are you building a Sabbath into your life? If you do work 6 days a week, then there needs to be a seventh day. But sometimes it's throughout our day. If we have an apportioned time, do we build a Sabbath moment into our life? Do we build that focused rest? Because we can get busy with all of our day, all of our time, all of our stuff. And before you know it, it's we just taken this concept out. And I think it's so important to understand spending time with the Father. That's what Jesus did, and I think that's the purpose of that rest. I've been to Israel, and they still do the Sabbath, but you know what? I find there is not a lot of rest during those Sabbaths because there's so much work trying not to work. It's funny when you get around them, and there's so much. Oh, we can't do this, we can't do that, and it's almost like you get stuck in the checking the boxes, but the focus and the rest is not there. They have times, but I think you have to be very careful that um, the purpose of it doesn't get lost. Some people say, "Well, Saturday, Sunday's my Sabbath." I've seen some people on Sundays. There's nothing restful about it. You come in, you check your boxes, and you go do whatever you do, but there's no purpose in preparing for what's next. Because I think it comes back to the grace, I think it comes back to the rest. What God's trying to get us to is a place in constant alignment that when we hear Him say, do it, we do it. Now, I would challenge a little bit, Rachel. You said delayed obedience is disobedient. There's not a lot of grace in that statement. I guarantee God will use your delayed obedience and still do amazing things with it. How many times have you had delayed obedience, which He knew you were going to do, and then you were at the right place at the right time with the right word, and you could look back and say, I should have done this earlier. And He's like, that's okay. I'll use it, and I'll put the right person in your path to make sure it's impactful. Like, that's where that grace comes in that place. Doesn't mean that every time He tells me to do something, I'm going to sit on it for a little bit. But it does mean that He's bigger than that. So that grace does come. Julie and then Chris.
Yeah, I love this. I think it's so important for us to keep our eyes on our own journey with the Lord too, because what is Sabbath to you is not Sabbath to me necessarily. And when I think about rest, it's like, what is truly restorative? What is restorative in this moment? And like, I've gotten my greatest ideas when I'm like making cookies or sourdough bread or something, like that's not in alignment with what the Jewish people would do because they would not be making bread on their Sabbath. But finding things that really are restorative to us. And I found myself, I actually made a list yesterday of restorative activities. I finished my 3 day event and I was like, I really should go to the beach and take a walk. And like that was the thought that came to me after I was done, after all the things I needed to do. I think that would be good for me to go walk on the beach. I didn't do it. I stayed at my desk and I kept writing emails and I kept doing all the things. And I woke up the next morning with my shoulder up like this, like my neck frozen, and all the tension all in my body. And it was like, oh, that was actually a really good nudge. like, and so the thing that I learned is how do I build in restorative activities to my rhythm, whether it's during when I've had a few busy days or, how do I plug those things in? And I think it falls into the line of play as well. How am I playing? Am I being childlike? How am I incorporating opportunities to just laugh and be joyful? Because I think that so much of the entrepreneurial thing is we're sitting at our desks or we're doing the work where programs are always running in our minds. And that affects the nervous system. That affects everything because you're just like, oh, I should do this. Or you're seeking revelation for something all the time. And for me, I got to get out of my house. I got to get out of my house and maybe I need to go for a road trip. I need to take a day drive. Finding the things. If I'm jumping on my little rebounder, I can't be planning stuff because I'm just like I'm in the moment. So I think that like figuring out what is truly restorative, like your own prescription of what is restorative, and figuring out how can we incorporate play into our life and be childlike, like the Lord tells us to be.
And that's a good thing about a godly marriage too. When you find that person, you begin to look out for one another too, because it is the true two becoming one. So if one of you is frazzled and anxious and carrying all the stress, guess what? It affects both of you. It affects your household. So then you begin to look out for one another too. Finding that spouse is important because you do want that concept of when I see it, and I'll probably see it before she does, or she'll see it in me before I do. And there's been times when she sees it and I'll lash out and then I'm like, "Yep, you're right." And I can go back and apologize. But it is important to have those friends and relationships in your life that can help you even see it because we can get busy doing the things that are good things. They're good things, and we know it has to get done. Ministry is the same way. Like we can get, man, I got to do this, this, and this, and before you know, you're just spent, and then you can't do anything for anybody, but you'll try because this is my calling. Um, but you gotta put those things in place.